All right. So to sort of motivate what we are talking about, let me start with two problems that we have to solve in the modern internet. Pretty much, one of them you have to solve daily, constantly, and the other one is extremely important for business, right? So let me start with the first one, which is, technically it is called secure communication over a public channel. Okay. And the solution to that ultimately also gives us what everybody knows as end-to-end encryption, which is becoming more and more important these days, right? So let me ask this question: that here, say, on this Zoom channel or using the chat there, okay, say Sandeep wants to send a secret message to Ved. Okay, so how can you do it? Okay, the problem is that all the rest of us are going to be listening to each and everything that you communicate with each other. Okay, everything that Sandeep says to Ved or Ved says to Sandeep is going to be heard by all of us, and yet without using any other method of communication, you have to find a way to communicate with each other. So by the way, do any of you know the answer to it already? Sandeep, Nano, or Ved?
Yeah, there is a way to send private message, right, in Zoom.
No, no, no. So without using the private message facility, right? Everything you can, the only
Code.
messages you can send each other are in public.
Talk in code.
Talk in code. What code? How do you decide on the code?
Of course, we need to agree between ourselves. What?
No. So the point is that you have never communicated with each other
Oh,
before, and you want to communicate now. So there was no pre-decided code.
One thing you
I mean,
can.
your answer is correct. Ultimately, you have to talk in code.
I think one of the ways you can talk in a language only you and the person you convey, and just you can understand.
Yeah. No, no. So, the only language you speak are maths and English. So, and pretty much everybody on the channel also knows whatever languages you know, right? And just think about it. I mean, if you come up with a secret code, the password has to be known to both of you, but nobody else. And the only way to share the password is through the same public channel, which I am going to be listening to everything that you communicate, right? I mean, if you spend a few minutes thinking about this problem, you realize that it seems impossible to solve, right? Because if anything, whatever you are agreeing to, I can hear, then I can break whatever code you come up with, right? So this is impossible problem number one. And one of the points I want to make today is that modern cryptography is almost like magic. It solves these problems which seem that they would be impossible to solve, right? So the first problem is this one: how do you communicate over a public channel, but you can still communicate secretly? Okay. Second problem is this, right, which is a digital signature. So what's a signature? There is a document. Sandeep sold his house to Ved. So now they wrote up a document saying that house number 42, which belonged to me, Sandeep, now belongs to Ved. And then Ved gives money to Sandeep. And then Ved doesn't want Sandeep to come back tomorrow saying, I never sold this house to you, it is still my house. So what does Ved do? He makes Sandeep sign on the document. Okay. And this signature is supposed to be unforgeable. It's not easy for anybody other than Sandeep to create this signature. And that's why this whole thing works. Except that now we are on the internet. We want to do things digitally. And I have a Word document where Sandeep says that he's transferred ownership of this house to Ved. And now I want to get Sandeep to sign this document. Okay. Digitally. How do you do that? I mean, because the problem is anything you put in the Word document, anybody can copy paste to another document, right? So in this situation, what does even a digital signature mean, right? Can you think of what could you do to prove that it was only Sandeep? I mean, Sandeep did something to the, I mean, you put something at the end of the document, which proves that Sandeep agrees with the contents of this document.
You make it
And
say that
it shouldn't be,
only.
sorry, go ahead.
So the concept of public and private key. So
No, if you know the answer, don't give me the answer, Akash. Okay. If you already know the answer, you can't give the answer. And that's my job, right? I want people to try to guess how do you, I think the reason I'm trying to make you guess is to make you realize how difficult this problem is, right? Because I also want, this Nano who's sitting there, he actually wants Sandeep's house number 43 for free, right? So whenever Sandeep puts a signature on the first document, Nano is going to copy paste everything from there, put it on a different document where it says, I transfer ownership of house number 43 to Nano, and then he's going to go around claiming that now house number 43 is mine, right? So you have to prevent this copy paste problem also. So how do you do this?
You probably do something like an invisible link.
No, so again, the problem, one more issue with a signature is that tomorrow when Ved tries to sell this house to me, right? I should be able to very easily verify that Sandeep has signed this document, right? So anybody in the world should be able to quickly and easily validate that Sandeep actually signed this document and Sandeep agrees with all the contents of this document, right? So no invisible ink stuff.
You have to lodge this into a registry, like some common body.
So then, yeah, so that is the thing with the common body. Yeah.
Sandeep needs a unique signature to be able to recognize that this is his signature. Then you know.
Well, yeah, problem is Nano is the problem here.
Like out here in the UK, they lodge all these.
Sandeep puts in the first document. Nano is going to copy paste into the second document.
So, like here in the UK, they lodge all documents with the land registry. So you can go to the land registry and
correct.
Verify that. Yeah.
So there are two problems with land registry. In fact, our old system works that way, right? Because Sandeep's actual physical signature is fairly easy to copy. So that's not the one really providing protection. The really providing protection is you go to the registry and do the document. But that's the old non-digital way of doing things, right? It requires everybody to be online to be able to check whether the signature is there with the registry. And second is you have to trust the registry. Okay. We have a solution which is better than that, right? It can be done offline and it can be doesn't require a third party. Okay, but I want you to feel convinced that this is a fairly difficult problem, right? Anybody in the world should be able to verify that this is really Sandeep's signature. I shouldn't be able to change the house number in that document, right? If I change house 42 to 43, the signature should become invalid, right? Now this problem exists even in paper documents, right? In fact, when we make changes, then Sandeep has to go and make a signature there. And that's still a little tricky, right? I mean, if you change a page in the middle, now you have to have Sandeep's initials on every page. All of these are problems. Whereas our solution is going to say that you change a single character and the whole thing becomes invalid. Okay. So these two impossible sounding problems are what we are going to solve today. The first part is going to involve some math, about 10-15 minutes. I will do the math. It's fairly simple math, but so bear with me. Later on, we are going to use this to solve not just these two problems, but a whole bunch of other problems they can solve. Okay, let me just see. There is a comment here. So somebody says we take other proof from Sandeep, like an identity, and have a third person witness this deal, right? Now, all of this is not a digital solution. Yeah, you're just giving me the old method of doing things. And that requires, I mean, it doesn't work in a lockdown, right? We want a solution that works in lockdown over Zoom. Okay, so that's what we are
hash value?
Sorry? Yes.
So we use that hash value type of thing.
Something like that. So that's what, in fact, that is the solution, but we have to understand what it is and why it works. So that's what we are going to look at. Okay. So let me share my screen so I can show you the math. Sorry. Okay. All right. So before I go on, right, I just want you to, I'm going to explain to you what is called public key and private key encryption. That it is also known as asymmetric encryption. Okay. Normally you might have used, say, these password encoded PDF documents and other ways of encryption. Usually what happens is that you take a document, now using a password, you encrypt it. So you convert it into some coded format, and to decrypt the document later, you need the same password back, right? And that's why this is called symmetric encryption, because the password used for encoding is same as the password used for decoding, okay? And this system of encryption cannot be used for secure communication over a public channel, because say Sandeep and Ved want to talk to each other, they need to have a shared password, and there is no way of sharing a password. I mean, there is no easy way of sharing a password for the two of them. And that's why this kind of a scheme doesn't work. Okay. So instead, what we're going to do is this asymmetric encryption, where you take a message and then you encrypt it using one password. To decrypt it, you need a different password. Okay. So this scheme involves two passwords. And that's what we are going to see. That's what we are going to sort of go through the math for that. And this simple thing, this is it. This is the basic idea. Using this, we can solve all the problems, our digital signatures, our secure communication over public channel, end-to-end encryption, all of that, just using this basic idea, right? It's not easy. I mean, it took some fairly involved maths to do it, but we'll get to that, okay? To do this, you first need to understand something called modular arithmetic. And it's a fancy name, but really it is just very simple, which is that you just do your regular arithmetic, right? Addition, multiplication, and all of that. But at the end, you take remainder with one particular number, right? So for example, I'm just going to introduce this operator called mod, which is like division, except that after division, you don't take the quotient, you take the remainder. Yeah. So 14 mod 10 is 4, 5 mod 2 is 1, because remainder of 1 is left over, and 33 mod 5 would be 3. Okay. So this is module, this is the mod operation. And sometimes I'll call it A mod n equals B mod n and so on, but sometimes I might just use this notation, right? Where A is equal to B mod n. So in mod 10 arithmetic, 14 and 4 are the same number, right? Because they both leave the same remainder with 10. Similarly, in mod 12 arithmetic, 1 and 13 are the same number. Okay. One more thing important here is that in mod arithmetic, the original number by which we are dividing everything, if you add that to either side of an equation, the number remains unchanged. Okay. And you will see, examples of mod arithmetic that we use in day-to-day life, right? So 4, if I add 10 to 4 and I get 14, it's the same number mod 10, where mod 10 can be, I can say that I'm just interested in the last digit. Okay. A more useful example is that if I'm interested in just the hours on a clock hand, right? So if I say, 1 o'clock is the same as 13 o'clock, which is the same as 25 o'clock, and so on, right? I add any multiple of 12 to the hour just now, and I will get back the same hour. What I'm doing is I'm doing regular addition. In the end, I'm taking remainder with 12 and I get my current hour, right? So mod arithmetic is used in hours. Similarly, day of the week, right? If it is Monday is 1 and Tuesday is 2 and so on, then adding 7 gives me back the same day of the week, right? So those are just some examples of mod arithmetic. And this is going to seem a little silly, and why are we doing this? But trust me, this is what is going to solve our impossible problems magically. Okay. So general rule is that in mod arithmetic, adding a multiple of n, where we are doing mod n, to either side of the equation doesn't change anything. Okay. And how do we do addition in mod arithmetic? It's just you do regular arithmetic and you do mod in the end. So a mod n and plus b mod n is the same as a plus b mod n. So an example would be that 14 plus 12 is actually 26 mod 10, which is 6 mod 10, but I could have just directly done 4 plus 2 also. And this is one of the important points here, right? You'll notice that arithmetic operations become much simpler because you're never dealing with very large numbers, right? You're always dealing with small numbers. You can always keep doing mod and end up with a simpler arithmetic. Okay, that's one of the properties we are going to use. Same thing with multiplication, right? So a mod n into b mod n is just a into b, and then you do mod n in the end. And this is just an example here. Subtraction. So before even doing subtraction, I mean, I would need negative numbers to be able to do subtraction, right? So can anyone tell me what, how do I do negative numbers in mod? How would I handle? Or to put it this way, what is -1 in modify arithmetic, or what is remainder if I divide -1 by 5?
I think this should be the same as 4, right?
This is same as 4. Like I told you, right? Just adding 5 to the number shouldn't change it. And I don't want to deal with negative numbers, right? Nobody likes negative numbers. They're just evil and confused people. So I'm just going to deal with positive numbers. In fact, I'm going to deal just with numbers from 0 to n-1, and no other numbers exist in my world. So if I get any negative number, I'm just going to add n to it and get back my positive number. And that's how I will deal with subtraction. Okay. So -1 is same as -1 plus 5, which is 4. And so I just do regular subtraction and I'll end up with a negative number, and I keep adding n until I get a positive number, and that's my answer. Okay. So subtraction is easy. Division is a problem. Okay. And I'll tell you why division is a problem, but no, for that I need to stop share. Hold on. Let me show you what happens. There's some interesting properties this has with multiplication, and I'm going to show you that. Okay, so do you see this Excel spreadsheet on the screen? Yeah, okay. All right. Now, one good thing about modular arithmetic is that the number of numbers is limited, right? So my entire multiplication table, all possible multiplications in the universe are there in this one box, right? That's it. The only numbers that exist are 1 to 14, 0 to 14, and 0 to 14, and all the multiplications are right here. Okay. One thing to notice here, do I want to notice right now? Is that if you look at any row in this, right? In this row, all numbers from 1 to 15 show up in some random order, okay? But in this row, there aren't. In this row, only 3 numbers are there. In this row, all the numbers from 1 to 14 have shown up. In this row, all the numbers from 1 to 14 have shown up. Okay. And if we just color them separately, what do you notice? Which ones, the blue ones have all the numbers and the beige ones don't have all the numbers. And you will see that the numbers which have a common factor with n, this is, I've done mod 15 here, right? The numbers which have a common factor are the ones which have repetitions, and the numbers which have no common factors don't have repetitions. Okay. And this is going to become suddenly very important. I'll show you why. Okay. So how do we do division? Okay. Division is a problem because I want to do 12 divided by 3. Okay. Normally I would just say 12 divided by 3 is 4. Okay. But there is an issue with this. The issue is that normally division has to be opposite of multiplication, which means that 3 into what gives 12? I'm trying to answer that, right? So obviously, yeah, 3 into 4 gives 12, but also if I do 3 into 9, okay, so that's 27. If I do mod 15, I again get 12. So is 12 divided by 3, is it 4 or is it 9? Okay. Now this is a problem because this is confusing. There are 2 different answers, and mathematics works pretty badly if the same thing has 2 different answers, right? So division is not going to work if we do this. So what do we do? What we say is that if there are multiple answers like this, then division is undefined. Just like we said, you know, in regular arithmetic, division by 0 is undefined. Similarly, in mod arithmetic, division by a number like 3 is undefined if it's going to give you multiple answers. And anybody want to guess when you will get multiple answers? When would division be undefined?
Yeah. I think when you're dividing by something that is that has a common factor with your base.
Exactly. When it has a common factor with a base, it is going to have repetitions.
Yeah.
In fact, you know, it's more. Let me get a little more specific than that, right? What you do, division isn't defined. You know, division is defined as multiply by the inverse. Okay, and inverse of a number is if a into b is 1, right? Then a is 1 upon b or b is 1 upon a. So a and b are inverses of each other, right? In fractional numbers, this makes sense to us. The thing with our modular arithmetic is that it actually makes sense with even regular numbers. If you notice here, I say 4 multiplied by 4, okay, is 1 because it is 16, mod 15 is 1. Similarly, if I look at 7, I can see that 7 into 13 is actually 1, okay. So 7 is the inverse of 13 and 13 is the inverse of 7. And this is possible because in modular division, 2 large numbers can multiply to give a small number like 1 because of the wraparound that is happening. Okay. So this is the first thing. I mean, division is just defined as multiplication by the inverse. The only thing is, what do you want to say? What is the inverse of 5 if you look at this row? I mean, I'm asking the question. Sorry, go ahead. 5 multiplied by what gives 1? And if I look at this entire row, 5 multiplied by nothing gives 1. 5 multiplied by things always gives me 0 or 5 or 10. That's it. Right? In fact, if you look every beige row, there is no 1 in there. In fact, you can prove that if there was a 1 in there, then it would actually be a blue row, which would have all the numbers in there, right? So specifically, blue rows are the only rows which have an inverse, okay? And that is what allows us to define division, which is that, again, same thing, inverse only exists if there is no common factor between that number and n. Okay, which means that division is only defined when an inverse exists. Okay, so this, I mean, even if you didn't understand what I did, just keep in mind that there exists a concept of inverse. Yeah, go ahead, Sandeep.
Yeah, so I mean, this may be a side detour, but so the concept of like a large number or small number, that whole thing then doesn't really carry over in this kind of arithmetic, right? Because so from two, like you go to a larger number, its inverse is also larger, right? So that whole thing doesn't apply then.
Exactly, right. In fact, so this whole concept of large versus small just disappears in that sense.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. But so now I want this concept of inverse is important. Okay. Inverse, A inverse is a number such that A multiplied by A inverse is going to give me a 1. Okay. And this 1 is going to be important because it allows me to then, you know, generate any number that I want. And A inverse only exists if A has no factor in common with N, what I'm doing my mod with. Okay. So if even people, you know, who are not interested in the math, that A inverse is the number which gives you a 1 when multiplied by A, and it doesn't exist every time. It exists when there is no common factor. Okay. And this is division. If B inverse exists, then A divided by B is A into B inverse. Okay. And there exists a very simple algorithm to compute the inverse of a number. Okay. In fact, if you remember Euclid's algorithm for finding the GCD, right? That algorithm can be modified a little bit to easily find the inverse, but that's not important. We're not going to worry about it today. What we want to look at is, you know, modular exponentiation. Okay. And in regular arithmetic, A raised to B is A into A into A into A B times, right? In modern arithmetic, it's exactly the same, except that in the end, we stick a mod n at the end, right? So other than that, nothing has changed and everything is simple, right? Now, I just want you to look at exponentiation tables. Okay. Sorry. So just like I had, again, you know, I can just have exponent, I mean, the total number of numbers in my universe is limited, so I can just draw the entire table for you, right? Let me do exponentiation of 21, just to make things different. Okay. Okay. All right. I gave away the answer, but anyway, this is the exponentiation table, right? Obviously, it is row raised to column. Okay. So if column B is various things raised to 0, so obviously all of them are 1, not very interesting. Column C is also not very interesting. So it's basically something raised to 1. So, you know, 8 raised to 1 is 8, 10 raised to 1 is 10, and so on. So obviously column C is just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 until n minus 1. Okay. Do you notice anything? Now just focus on the columns. Okay. Don't worry about what's happening in the rows. Do you notice anything interesting happening in any of the columns? The first screen that showed up here was a hint.
There are certain rows which have the same number across.
No, but that's just, you know, 7 is its own inverse, right? So 7 into 7 is 1, then 7 into 7 into 7 is also 7, then 7 into 7 into 7 is also
columns
just
repeat.
going to be 7 every time, right?
Columns
so that,
repeat.
you know, columns repeat, right? So if you notice column C and in fact, so let me show, right? The beige columns are all the numbers 1 to n in order. The next one is just, you know, some permutation. but column D is the same as column J, which is the same as column P, which is the same as column V. Similarly, E will be the same as K, which will be the same as Q, and so on. Right? So let's focus on, I mean, basically the whole chunk repeats like this. The important ones are the beige columns, okay? And what you see is that it repeats at 1, 7, 13, 19, 25. In fact, every 6, it is repeating, okay? And let me see if I can show you for 15. Yeah, so this is the exponentiation table for mod 15. And here you can see that it is 1, 5, 9, 13, 17. The whole thing is repeating, all right? So the gap here is 4, okay? And in fact, it can be proved that for any number, there is always exists a number like this, after which the whole thing repeats, okay? And for, I'm going to call it the magic number L, because you know L is easy for everybody to remember and it is not scary. The real name is Carmichael's totient function, and it's a lambda, okay? But let's stick to L, okay? Now the properties of this L are very interesting, okay? The first thing we noticed is that m raised to L plus 1 is L, m itself, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then when I raise to L plus 1, that is 6 plus 1 or 12 plus 1 or 18 plus 1, I got back the same number, right? Again, I got back 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that mathematically, this is what it means. In fact, m raised to not just L plus 1, plus 2L plus 1, 3L plus 1, 4L plus 1, m raised to any KL plus 1 is going to give back m, okay? If you aren't sure what I'm talking about, let's just look at it again and convince yourself, right? Where L is 6 in this case. So I see 5 raised to 6 plus 1 is 5, 5 raised to 12 plus 1 is 5, 5 raised to 18 plus 1 is 5. I take 12, and 12 raised to 6 plus 1 is 12, 12 raised to 12 plus 1 is 1, and so on, right? This is the most important thing in cryptography, okay? We are going to use this now. Just keep this in mind. M raised to L plus 1 is, you get back the original m, okay? Now, just any questions about what we have done so far? We are mostly done with the maths, just 2 steps and we will have reached public key cryptography, okay? But any questions about what we saw so far? Anything confusing? Okay, cool. So Euler, of course, proved that if n is a product of 2 primes, p and q, right? Then this magic number L is going to be LCM of p minus 1 and q minus 1, okay? So you don't have, I mean, the details are not important. The point is that if, you know, n is the product of 2 prime numbers, then L can be computed very easily. In case of 21, right, the 21 is 7 into 3. So P minus 1 and Q minus 1 are 6 and 2. LCM of 6 and 2 is 6. That's why things were repeating after every 6. For 15, it is 5 into 3. So LCM of 4 and 2, which is 4, right? So that's how you compute L. Important thing is computing L is very easy if you know P and Q, okay? Now, how do I communicate over a public channel? Okay, so Sandeep wants to send a message to Ved. Okay, this is what Sandeep does. Well, actually, for the purposes of my presentation, we are going to use Alice and Bob and Carol. Okay, so Alice wants to send a message to Bob, and Carol is the evil person sitting in the middle, listening to everything. Right? What Sandeep does, well, sorry, Alice, right, is find 2 numbers E and D such that, right, E and D are inverses of each other. Okay, and this is what we are going to do. I mean, we are going to use this particular equation. Everyone, you know, comfortable with this? M raised to E raised to D is the same as M raised to E into D, right? This is just fairly basic math. Now, if E into D is equal to L plus 1, what happens, right? Because M raised to L plus 1 is always M, right? And E into D is L plus 1 or 2L plus 1. E into D, basically E into D mod L is 1. Okay, that's how we have chosen our E and D. Okay, so if that is true, then M raised to E raised to D is going to be M. I'll get back my original M. Okay. So this is what we have managed to achieve so far. Okay. M raised to E into D is M, and M raised to E raised to D is also M. How am I going to use this to do communication over a secret channel? This is what happens, right? Any message that Alice wants to send, right? She encodes it as a number, M, right? Encoding any message as a number is fairly trivial, right? You can do simple things like A is equal to 1, B is equal to 2, and so on, and convert it to numbers, or you just take the ASCII code of your message and you get a number, right? So let M be, any message you want to send, you can think of it as a number. So as far as this talk is concerned, M is going to just be a message is going to be just a number. What I compute is M raised to E, and that value is C. Okay. Now Alice sends C over to Bob. Okay. And what Bob has to do is C raised to D. If Bob computes, then that is just going to be equivalent to M raised to E raised to D, which is M raised to E into D, which is M raised to L plus 1, which is M, right? So just all Bob has to do is whatever Alice sent, if you raise it to D mod M, you're going to get back the original message. Okay. So if C is M raised to E, then C raised to D is M. Okay. If you remember my picture that I have one password to encode and a different password to decode, this is my password, right? My E and my D are the two passwords. Okay. So what is going to happen? Okay. What Alice does is pick P and Q, two prime numbers. Okay. Then compute LCM of P minus 1, Q minus 1, that gives you your L. Then pick any random E, a small prime number. Okay. Now you have to compute E inverse mod L. Okay. And this is the D. Okay. So this is what Alice has computed, all sitting on her own laptop, no internet needed, nothing needed, right? Just take two prime numbers, compute L, pick a random E, compute E inverse. This E inverse is D. Okay. And that's it. We are done, right? D will be saved carefully. Alice will save D, write it down on a piece of paper, put it in her wallet. Okay. What she does is on the public channel, she sends N and E to Bob. Okay. Carol and Nano and everybody is watching. They have N and E. They don't have D. Okay. Now Alice wants to send a secret message, right, to Bob. By the way, now Alice also throws away P, Q, and L. P, Q, and L are not to be saved. Okay, they were just used once to create this E and D. Okay, so when Alice wants to send some message to Bob, she computes M raised to Alice computes M raised to D. Okay, not sorry, what am I doing? I just reversed it. Okay, Bob is the one who does D and N and all of that. Bob sends N and E to Alice. Now what Alice does is Alice computes M raised to E, which is C, and sends this over the public channel. Okay. Notice that at this point, Bob knows E, D, N, all three things. Alice knows E and N, but not D. D only Bob knows. Nobody knows D other than Bob.
Kabra, you confused us when Alice became
Carol
Bob or
and
vice
Ved
versa.
and Nano, everybody else. Yeah. Huh?
You
Sorry?
confused us when Alice became Bob or Bob became Alice.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. But now basically the person
Bob-
who's receiving
Bob
the
the-
message.
Bob is the person doing the initial calculation.
Yes, correct.
Acha,
Right.
theek hai.
So Bob knows D. Bob is the only one who knows D. Everybody else knows E and N. Okay. M is only known to Alice. Alice is sending this message. She wants to send it secretly. She computes M raised to E. And this just the C is what she sends on the public channel. Okay. Now what Bob does, Bob knows D. So he just computes C raised to D mod N and he gets back the M. That's it. Alice has managed to send a message to Bob. Okay. Nano and Carol, who are listening to this, they have C, they have E, they have N. But because they don't have D, they have no way of getting M back. Right? So in spite of the fact that everything, all the communications happened in public, the thing is that there is no way for anybody other than Bob to decode this message. Okay, did that make sense? Everybody clear on this?
Yeah, but Kabra, with this, Bob can't send a message to Alice.
Yes, but who wants to answer this? Bob can't send a message to Alice. How do you solve this problem?
Yeah, so Bob will use Alice's key then, right? So that'll be
Correct.
basically, it'll be done in reverse. Correct.
Notice that Bob just sat there with his computer and he picked a random P, random Q, random E and did these calculations. He didn't need the permission of any authority. He didn't need an internet. He didn't need a registrar. Just locally, he could pick random prime numbers and create E, N, and D. Same thing Alice can also do, right? This process is called creating a key pair, right? This is a pair of keys. E is the public key, D is the private key. And anybody can create a key pair. And out of that, the public key you send out on public channel. In fact, you set it as your WhatsApp status and you put it in your Instagram story, right? That this is my public key, so that everybody in the world knows what your public key is. And now anybody in the world can send you a message which only you can read and nobody else can read. And none of this required any secret communications. None of this required any central authority, right? So think about this. We have managed something pretty impressive already. Okay. By the way, everybody, you can rejoice. The math part is over. Now we are just this one thing we are going to use to solve all our other problems. Okay, so just one other thing.
So I think Kabra, so the little subtle thing here was that the sender is not doing some generic encryption.
Yes.
Every encryption is purpose built for a certain recipient, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that is a fairly important point, right? So that achieves two things. One is that this message can only be decrypted by that person. Nobody else can decrypt it, right? Now, let me ask a different question. Okay. I get an anonymous message from a random Twitter account, right? Because basically what Ved, it claims to be Ved, and Ved tells me that, oh, I was traveling in Nigeria and I lost my passport and my wallet, and I need you to send me some money so that I can get a flight home. Right? I personally know people who have fallen for and lost it. Okay, somebody else pretending to be Ved. But using this, just a minute, my connection is unstable. Okay, all right. So using what we have learned so far, how would you, I want to confirm whether it is really Ved I am talking to. How would I do that? right? The problem is somebody who claims to be Ved. Oh, and by the way, assume that in real life, the real Ved has put his public keys on his Instagram, right? So anybody can go and check what his public key is. So that's the hint. Now, some random guy is messaging me saying, oh, well, I don't have access to my account because I lost my phone. So I am using an anonymous account from a cyber cafe. How do you prove that you are Ved?
So you have to use that published public key that Ved has published on Instagram. But
Yeah.
then I'm thinking, what do you do with it exactly, right?
Yeah,
How do you apply it to this message,
what
and then what do you
message is-
get?
Send him a message with that encrypted, and he can only decode it, right? Because if he has both the keys.
But what message will you send in order? Because anybody
Okay,
can
so
send
I'll
a
give you
message
a
saying that
hint.
I am Ved.
He just send me back
No,
a
I'll
WhatsApp
give you a
message with the
hint.
same thing, right? Decrypt it and send it back to me.
No, but that's a good one. No, wait, but yes, that's actually a good solution. Who was that? So basically, I can encrypt a message using Ved's public key, send it to Ved and say, you know what? If you can decrypt this message and tell me what it was, then you're the real Ved. Otherwise, you're not the real Ved, right? So that's a good answer. I had not thought of that. The standard answer for this is the following. Ask Ved to encrypt a message using his private key. Okay. What he is doing is m raised to d. Now, if I do that raised to e, I will get back the original m.
Yeah.
Right. So public key encryption works in reverse also. Anything encrypted with your secret key can only be decrypted with your public key. Okay. And what that means is that Ved can create a message which proves that only Ved could have created that message and nobody else. Okay. Anyone in the world can decrypt that message using Ved's public key and confirm that this is indeed Ved's, confirm that only Ved could have created this because nobody else knows the D. And the maths involved here is such that it is impossible to create a C which will decode to a given message unless you know the D. Okay, did that make sense?
How difficult it is to create such unique Ds?
How difficult is it to create a D and E, a key pair?
Yeah, a private key.
No, wait. Are you asking how difficult is it to create a brand new public key, private key pair, or how difficult is it?
Yeah, because here we were talking of here we were talking of relatively a small set of numbers. Given there are a billion people, how do you create keys?
Okay. So the answer there is fairly simple, right? I mean, although I talked to you about 21 and 15 and tiny numbers like this, in reality, when you do this with real computers, you use, 200-digit numbers. Okay. So you pick a 100-digit P prime number P, 100-digit prime number Q, multiply them together to get a 200-digit number N, and that's what you use, right? As a result, if you try to brute force search for all the possible D values, you are looking at 10 raised to 100 possibilities, right? That's more than the number of atoms in the entire universe. So that's not going to work.
Kabra, one basic question.
The thing is,
So imagine your previous example. Alice was a browser and Bob was the server.
Correct.
Then we know how the browser can encrypt and send data to the server, and server can decrypt it.
Yeah.
If Bob has to actually send data to the browser, let's say, for example, WebSocket, how does it do it? Because browser can be from anywhere, right?
So let's talk about this specific question, right? First, let's take the simple case, which is that you want to send messages to Gmail. Okay. By the way, all of you, do you know that if you send a message via the internet, right? If you don't use HTTPS, if you don't use encryption of some sort, who all can read it? First of all, in your house, right? Or just outside your window, anybody sitting with a Wi-Fi receiver can use some software, and they can, without even doing any thing, they can listen to each and every packet they are sending. Okay. Second is that you have a Wi-Fi in your building. Okay. And there are other people sharing the same ISP. Those guys can see all the messages you are sending if they use special software, right? Now this message goes to your ISP's main office. All the sysadmins there can read each and every message that is going past, right? And from there it goes to another central server in Bombay and in New York and all of that. And along the way, each and every sysadmin can read each and every message, save it, store it, pick out the credit card numbers, and so on, right? So the internet by default is extremely unsafe. Okay. Now you want to talk to Citibank and you want to type in your password, and then you want to transfer like $1 million to your friend, right? How do you make sure that nobody is reading it? Okay. For that, the answer is simple. I mean, normally, using this system, what you could do is encrypt it using Citibank's public key, send it across, and only Citibank would be able to decrypt it because only Citibank has the private key, right? That's easy. Normally, you don't do that because, you know, this public key encryption stuff is a little expensive. So for a high volume, you don't use public key encryption. It would slow down things too much. So in reality, what you do is you use public key encryption to choose a password. Okay, remember, if we said that, you know, if Sandeep and Ved could have chosen a password beforehand, then they could just use that password, encrypt a message, and Sandeep will use that password to decrypt it at the other end. The only problem was that how do you choose a password? Well, you use public key encryption to choose a nice strong password, and then the rest of your communication you do using that password using just regular symmetric encryption. And that's not a problem because nobody knows that password other than the two of you. And that's the same thing that happens when your browser contacts Citibank. They do what is basically, this is called a, you know, you choose a key, and then the rest of the communication happens using this particular key that you have chosen. This is called a key exchange. And this is what HTTPS does. But there is a problem with this that nobody else pointed out. I'm hoping somebody tells me the problem with this particular scheme. So I just came, I opened my browser, I typed citibank.com, and behind the scenes, the browser and Citibank servers, they used the public key stuff to choose a password, and then the rest of the communication happened using encryption and that password. But there is a big hole in this argument. How does the browser know Citibank's public key? Where is it written?
There's the entire chain of this thing from the root CA to those people who will give you the details.
I mean, you realize the problem here, right? Somewhere there has to be a directory of public keys, correct? And I mean, that would be a problem. I mean, where would you keep the directory and so on? And that would not be scalable. So they have come up with a solution called a digital, SSL certificate. Okay. What Citibank does is that Citibank says, I am Citibank. Okay. And this is my public key, and it gives it to me. Now I say, but yeah, you are Citibank. You are claiming you are Citibank. What proof do I have? So the message saying that the public key of Citibank is so and so is encrypted using the private key of a known entity. Okay, let's say, what is that thing? I mean, Symantec or
certifying authorities.
Certifying
CS.
authority, right?
CS.
So
Yeah.
the certifying authority will encrypt the message using their private key. And now anybody who knows the public key of the certifying authority can decode this message and be convinced that the certifying authority guarantees that this is really Citibank's public key. That is why I know that whoever is the server talking to me right now is the Citibank server. Okay. And how do I know the public key of the certifying authority? I mean, for that, there is a higher certifying authority. And for that, there is a higher certifying authority, and it ends with like 14 root servers. Okay. What about that? I mean, all browsers come with those root servers, public keys of the root servers hard-coded in the code, right? So that's how the whole thing is bootstrapped. As in, Citibank tells you that I am Citibank, this is my public key, signed by so-and-so. That person's public key, that sends you a SSL certificate, and that's signed by somebody else. And ultimately, it has to be signed by one of the 14 public keys that the browser already knows about, right? So that basically is how, basically this is what SSL certificate is. And using that SSL certificate, you use HTTPS to communicate with websites. Okay, now coming back to Nano's question, right? If Ved and Sandeep need to talk to each other, right? They don't have a SSL certificate that is signed by a certifying authority, right? So what do they do? There it gets a little tricky, as in, you know, basically what you have to do is the first message that you exchange, you sort of have to be a little rambarose in the sense that, you know, each of them creates a public key, private key pair. They exchange the public keys, then they use that to, from now on, they're going to use this public key, private key to pick a password every time they have a session, right? And then tomorrow, when you have another session, you have pick another password. Although your public and private keys will remain the same, right? So the first time you send a WhatsApp message to somebody, you know, there is like a pause, nothing happens for a few seconds, and then the message comes saying that now there is going to be end-to-end encryption with this person, right? What is happening there is that both ends, the WhatsApp at both ends is creating public key, private key pairs, exchanging it with each other. And then from this point on, everything that these two exchange are going to be end-to-end encrypted. And what does end-to-end encrypted mean? It means that nobody along the way can decrypt the message. And this includes WhatsApp's servers. Okay. Now, Instagram is not like that. Okay. Instagram.
Kabra, so where are, so in that WhatsApp example,
yeah.
In that WhatsApp example, where are these public key, private key pairs for every pair of things getting stored exactly? Are they within, yeah.
Locally on your WhatsApp app on your phone.
Okay.
Okay. So the point is that, just a minute because my connection is unstable. Okay. So the point is that WhatsApp doesn't want to know the messages, right? Because, or at least didn't want to know when they were WhatsApp and not Facebook. The point is, if FBI shows up at WhatsApp's offices, they want to be able to say that, you know what, kya karna hai kar lo, we cannot decrypt this, right? That's why the private keys are, your private key is stored with your WhatsApp on your device. Ved's private key is stored on his device, and nobody else has this copy, right? That's why it is truly end-to-end encrypted. I mean, you know, WhatsApp can store these messages on the server if it wants, but they're useless to anybody else. Instagram is not like that. Okay. to Sandeep via Instagram, they are not doing public app, and the message is encoded using this new password and sent to Sandeep, right? So it's happening in 2 hops, and an unencrypted version is stored on Instagram servers. So that's the difference between, and of course, that is now accessible to the FBI, and NSA can say, you know what, just keep sending me 1 copy of every message that matches this particular keyword, right? So that's the difference between having end-to-end encryption and not having end-to-end encryption. Okay, Sandeep, hey, we are how much time more time do you have? We are at 9 o'clock your time already.
I have about 10 more minutes.
Okay, so 10 more minutes.
But others can carry on. So
sure,
I mean,
sure,
if you want
let's do digital signatures, right? Now for digital. Sorry, somebody had a question.
Anurag, you can unmute yourself, Anurag.
Okay. Hey, I missed the initial part, so I'm gonna just cut to the chase and ask the question about this cryptography word, right? You know, I love that WhatsApp example that you were giving about the messaging, right? Because everybody has this question on their mind about कि WhatsApp continue करें कि इसको बंद कर दें, move over to Telegraph या some other sort of you know, right? So you know, and I joined when you were like explaining a lot of math, you know, like public key, private key. I came across a solution which actually uses the phone, physical phone, as a way. It's called Bank Vault, bankvault.com. You guys can Google it if you want. But it's designed by an Australian guy. I'm just curious, like, would that be considered a cryptography solution where basically it's a code that runs on the server, and it allows you to authenticate the you know, bank customer or anybody else, right? But the code runs only on the server, 12 lines of code, and nothing you see on the browser. There is nothing. It's all tied to your phone.
So actually, phone. Anurag, this is a fairly you know, advanced thing. Let's come, and I want proof that Sandeep agreed everything in this document, right? How would I do this?
Sorry, I couldn't hear most of what you said. It broke up for me.
Oh, sorry.
Now I think now you are.
We'll come back to your question a little later.
Yeah, let's do that. Yeah, let's take it offline.
Using public key cryptography. How would I do a digital signature? There is a document, and I want proof that Sandeep agrees with everything in this document.
So like a signature, right? Is that?
Like the SSL certificates, the similar digital signatures, whichever we purchase, they have a kind of a what you call registered authorities.
Sign a document using this. So who's
I think Kabra's connection was falling off.
Yeah, sometimes it's patchy, Kabra's connection. Just wait for him. He'll come back.
He's creating his P's and Q's right now.
Hi, sorry. Okay, I don't know what you guys talked about, but did we do digital signature?
We did, but I think you had a question.
So basically,
you had the question that how can we ensure that Sandeep agrees this is what is written?
So basically what I do is I ask Sandeep to encrypt the entire document using his public key, and that encrypted version, I just attach it to the document. Okay. Now, anybody in the world, just by taking Sandeep's public key, can decode the document, decode that part, and the original document comes out, right? So now I know for sure that Sandeep is the one who encoded exactly that, and nobody else could have done it, right?
So you said one thing. You said that that Sandeep will encode it with a public key. Won't he encode it with his private key?
Private.
Yeah.
Encode with Sandeep's private key. So this guarantees that nobody else could have done this encoding, and anybody can confirm that indeed this is Sandeep's. This is Sandeep, not somebody else, right? Because it decodes with Sandeep's public key. Right? And that's it.
But Kamra, private key is on Sandeep's device, correct? Is that a fair state? Private key is on Sandeep's device. So if he loses the device, and let's say I have access to Sandeep's device, I can.
Yeah. So see, that's the problem. That's the problem with all of this, right? Which is that all of this cryptography depends on the fact that you need to keep your private key protected, right? You do not give anybody else access to your private key. Once you give access to your private key to somebody, they can pretend to be you. They can spend all your money. They can do whatever, right? So you have to keep your private key protected.
That's precisely why that I was trying to bring up that bank.
No. So don't bring up advanced topics right now. We are at like bacha level. Okay. So I mean, the only thing with this digital signature is that it would be very big, right? If the entire document is being encrypted, and for that you just do a little trick, which is that you don't encrypt the entire document. You take a hash of the document and you encrypt the hash. That's it, right? So it will be tiny, but modern hashes give you a guarantee that, pretty much there is no other way of getting the same hash with a different document, right? If you change even one letter of the document, the hash becomes completely different and the signature will not match, right? And obviously this signature is specific to this document. Any other document, the signature doesn't match because the contents are different, right? So now, as long as you can guarantee that the private key was kept private, we have a guaranteed method of doing digital signatures. And in fact, that's what it is, right? I don't know how you do digital signatures, but usually there will be like a thumb drive that you have to enter into your computer. That thumb drive basically has your private key in there, right? And when you sign a document, the software is picking up the private key from there, using that to do the encryption and attaching the signature. Okay. So digital signature is clear. All right.
One question is, how do I make my public key available to others? So for example, Monty has signed with his private key and given me the document.
Yeah.
How do I know that this public key that I have is from Monty?
Yeah, so that basically the situation there for an actual digital signature, right, which is like government approved digital signature, there has to be an actual registry of public keys somewhere, which in fact the government maintains.
Yeah.
Okay. So in India, if you have a DIN, the income tax department keeps track of the public keys. Okay.
Okay. Cool.
All right. Yeah. Now password managers. Okay. Now that's just one concept here is this concept of hash, right? Which is, it's like a checksum. Computer science people would already know what a hash function is, but a cryptographic hash has the extra property that given a document, you can create a hash. Usually it will be like 20 bytes or 32 bytes or something like that, right? You can create a hash very easily. But if you change even a single character of that document, the hash changes completely. Okay, that is one. And second is, given a hash, there is no way to create a document which will produce this hash. Okay, that is just considered, so expensive that, it will take 100 years with the most powerful computer for you to create a document which has the same hash as something, right? Now, how do you do, what's password manager, right? Basically what you want is that there are 100 different websites, 100 different usernames, and you are being told, by the way, did you know that minimum these days your password should be 12 characters? 8 and 9 characters take less than 2 or 3 minutes to crack these days. Okay, so if you're using 8-9 characters for your banks, you're all unsafe. The only reason you're not, all your money is not gone is because nobody cares. You're just not important enough. Okay, but so you need to have 12 characters or more for passwords, and every password should on every site should be different. So it's just impossible for anybody to remember all of this, right? So best is that you keep it in a password manager. And now the problem, what a password manager is just a database of website username password, website username password. Okay, now this by itself is dangerous, right? Somebody having access to all of this information, especially if it's a, but the cool thing is that the third-party websites never actually store your passwords directly, right? All they do is that this entire thing, right? Website username password is encrypted, and the encrypted version is stored in the cloud, but the key is never on the cloud. Okay, the key is on your device, and if you're sharing this on multiple devices, right? Each device has a key. The cloud encrypted versions which are useless. Okay, if admin there suddenly decides he doesn't like you and wants to steal your money, nothing doing, right? They can only see encrypted versions. They can't see anything else. When you land up at a particular website, you tell the cloud that I am looking for the password for this website. It sends the encrypted password across. And then your device here, which has the key, decrypts it and then fills out the form with that password. Okay. So somebody asked a question that is it safe to use Chrome for storing password? Reasonably safe. Okay. Because what Chrome or even Firefox or your browser is doing when they are storing passwords, they save it on disk, and then there is a master password. Everything is encrypted using the master password, and that master password is never stored. That you have to memorize, right? So when you start Chrome for the first time, it'll ask you what the master password is, and you can decrypt it, right? Now, if it is, I mean, that is configurable. If it doesn't ask you for all of this, then the master password is stored in Chrome itself, and then somebody would be able to get at it. Then it is not very safe, right? That's why better to have something like 1Password or LastPassword, which do this, this is done on a professional basis where they make very, 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 very certain that there is no easy way to break it. Okay. So I think I covered most of the important ones. Did I miss any important cryptography use case that we didn't solve so far? Okay, so Sandeep, if you need to leave, you can leave. We are done with the main program, but now we can take questions and advanced topics and things like that. Okay, so to be frank, Shashi asks, what about Samsung Knox password storage? You know what, I don't keep track of every individual password storage app and so on. But the simple rule of thumb I would use is that use something from a company which is primarily doing password storage, right? Like 1Password, LastPassword, because they do this full time and they do a good job of it. And this is a very difficult area, slight bugs in the code and all your passwords could be lost, right? So I wouldn't trust Samsung or somebody to be able to do a good job, especially hardware companies are terrible at software.
Okay, thanks.
Kabra, why 14 root servers? Why 14? Why not 7? Why not 100? Why not 51?
No. So I mean, it's probably not even 14, it is 16 or something like that. But basically the idea was that, if the entire internet is going to be ultimately dependent on these guys, it has to be more than 1 or 2. But it can't be a very large number because all these things have to be encoded into every browser and every software and so on, right? Plus, you have to make sure that each one of these is a very, 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 very reliable institution, right? So it's a random number. It's not very, no specific thing there.
Kabra, going back to the password example, right? Just make it like super clear in like an actual use case. So let's say I go to my bank website. Now I want to log in, right? So I want to fill in my password on the bank's login page. I first bring up my password manager sort of UI. I log into my password manager. That shows me what the password is for this bank site, right? And I take that string and I copy it over to the form, or the password manager will fill it into the form. So is the concept that that string, even that string is not going over the wire in a packet and some encrypted version of that password is going?
Absolutely.
Or is that,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So let me tell you what's happening, right? When you open your password manager, right? It asks you for the master password. That controls the key for decoding your passwords. Okay. Now, when you want the bank password, the encrypted version comes from the internet to your local machine. And then using your master password, it is decoded, right? So what you see on the screen exists only on this machine. Okay. Now you copy it, you paste it into the bank site. Okay. But at this point, it is still only in your browser. What you are seeing is a rendering of the web page of the bank's web page in your browser locally. Okay. By this time, by the fact that you're seeing this page means that a HTTPS connection has already been set up between your browser and the bank. They have already decided on a strong password, which they will use for all communications, right? So when you type in your password and you hit submit, this entire form gets encoded using HTTPS logic. And what goes over the net is the encrypted version, right? So the decrypted password never leaves your device.
Yeah.
Okay. Question here is. So one question is that I said that WhatsApp stores individual decryption keys locally in the device, right? But WhatsApp is closed source. How do we know that WhatsApp isn't storing these keys on the server, right? Should we just trust them when they say that they can't read our messages? Yes and no. Okay. Yes, in the sense that ultimately nobody has read that code. So you can't never be 100% guaranteed that WhatsApp isn't doing something shady like sending the password across to your to the server, right? Point is though that for something as important as WhatsApp, lots of cryptography and security researchers all over the world are constantly doing things, two kinds of things. One is trying to see what all packets WhatsApp is sending to the server and trying to analyze that and trying to figure out, is it doing anything funny? And second is actually even though the code is closed source, you can decompile the code and try to see what that code is doing and things like that, right? So if it was doing something shady, the chances are that in a few years, somebody somewhere would have sort of figured it out for the most important once, right? But yeah, there is no 100% guarantee.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. All right.
Hey,
Bye,
Kabra.
Yeah.
Couple of quick questions.
Yeah.
Most of the mobile phones which are dependent on Chinese version of the browsers,
yes,
so are they equally dependable, like say like Firefox or Chrome and all? So versus the Chinese browsers, so are they really dependable?
So the short answer is probably not, right? Because like I said, a browser is a pretty complicated piece of code, right? It's a huge code base, and popular, the top 3, 4, 5 browsers in the world, the kind of analysis I said, right? Decompiling the code and watching what messages are sent on the internet and so on, is done, right? But as you get to like number 14 and number 15 and number 50 and, you know, some variation by some random Chinese company, the chances that somebody analyzed it keep reducing, and the chances that they do something shady increase. Right? So it does happen that every once in a while you find out that this particular phone was trying to send something to a Chinese server. That is the easy part, right? But if it is doing something more tricky, you wouldn't know. So the answer is
one more question is, a lot of banks seems to have that virtual keyboard for password entry. So is that as secure?
I mean, see, that virtual keyboard is just something that looks good to you. It doesn't really add a whole lot of security to you, right? It helps only in the case that two cases. One is something called Keylogger, right? So Keylogger is a software, a malware, right? Which somebody can install on your computer, and what it is doing is that every keystroke that gets typed on your keyboard is stored in a log file, uploaded to some server somewhere, and they can search that log to try to find, did you type citibank.com, and then after that, what was the 8-digit string that you typed, and use that to find your password, right? But the problem is that if there is a keylogger on your machine, you have bigger problems than just, you know, the password of your bank. So just that one thing is not going to save you. So in any case, I mean, these things are reducing the use of these virtual keyboards. It doesn't help quite a lot. I mean, you're just safe, better off taking precautions to make sure that keyloggers can't get into your system.
Okay. Also, some of the employee performance tracking softwares which are being installed, especially during the pandemic.
Oh yes.
So some of these seem to have key logging and these kind of features.
Yes.
So usage of any of these machines basically for anything else is now going to be a problem, right? So,
absolutely. I mean, these companies, they do claim that they take care of these things, and, you know, in case of passwords, that information is not stored or not sent to the server and other such things. But again, I mean, you know, these are the kinds of things which is very easy for it to be buggy, and also very easy for the company to just lie that they take care of all of these things, because, you know, taking care of these things is not easy, right? It's fairly complex software and difficult to take care of all the corner cases. You know, it's easier for them just to implement something basic and then claim that they have solid protections against all of this. So this is a problem area.
Because most of the companies seem to be taking the cheapest solution in the market for employee tracking. And it's literally like made by mom and pop joints which are there around the corner and selling at like 250 rupees per employee or something.
Correct.
Okay.
And I mean, you know, every once in a while, you might find out that some admin of one of these companies was just, you know, on the side going through the database and picking off things. Such things happen.
Okay. Thanks.
So what are some recommended password managers? So LastPass and 1Password are the two that I hear most about. But yeah, any of the top 4 or 5, if you just do a search, and the top 4 or 5 that come up are fairly decent. All right, if there are any other questions, let me know, or you can just contact me. Let me put up, see if I have my email address up here.
Hey, Kabra.
Yeah.
Hey, Maniam here. I joined late. Is this session being recorded?
Yeah.
Like, can we access the recording later?
Yeah.
Yes, I think so. Katti, it is being recorded, right?
You can see it recording. So once the meeting closes, I will I'll get the recording and send it out.
Yeah. And I put up my email address, or I'm active on Twitter. So just if you think of a question later, just send me a message.
It's wiki.com.
And let's see, are there any other questions on chat?
Okay.
All right. Thank you, everybody, guys.
Yeah. Thanks, Kabra. This is very good.
Thanks, Kabra. Good to see everyone.
Yeah.
Thanks, Kabra.
Thanks. Bye.
Hey,
Bye,
fantastic
guys.
one, Kabra.
Bye.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thanks.
It was so nice to listen to this. Thank you.
Yeah.